I never expected my life to turn into a legal battlefield at this stage. I'm 60 years old, a retired real estate developer, and I've worked hard for everything I have. For decades, I put in the hours, made strategic investments, and built a legacy I plan to pass down to my children. But I never imagined that one family member would try to take it all. My story starts 5 months ago when my second wife, Linda, passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. It was devastating. We had been married for over a decade, blending our families together. I had 2 children from my first marriage, my son David, 32, and my daughter Emma, 29, while Linda had 3 children from her previous marriage, James, 34, the eldest and most entitled, Sophia, 30, who was always the peacemaker, Leo, 27, who mostly kept to himself. When Linda and I got married, we agreed to keep our finances separate, a decision we put in, writing through a prenuptial agreement. My assets were always going to stay with my biological children, though I still planned to support Linda's kids in reasonable ways. But apparently, reasonable wasn't enough. After Linda's passing, I sat down with my estate attorney to update my will. My $10 million estate was allocated carefully. David and Emma would inherit the majority. Sophia and Leo would each receive a $100,000 educational trust to help with their futures. James would receive nothing because he didn't deserve it. I had my reasons. Unlike Sophia and Leo, James had never respected me. He treated me like an outsider from the start and only spoke to me when he needed something. He had a history of financial irresponsibility, racking up debt, and blaming everyone but himself. I knew the second he got money, it would disappear into a black hole of bad investments and reckless spending. So I made my decision. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The news of my estate plans didn't stay private for long. James must have overheard a conversation or peeked at some documents, because 2 weeks later, he showed up at my house unannounced. The second I opened the door, I knew something was off. His expression was calm, too calm. "Hey, we need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I sighed. "What is it, James?" He cut straight to the point. "I heard you're not leaving me anything in your will." I nodded. "That's right." His jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Look, I get it. You and I have never been close. But at the end of the day, Mom loved you, and she would have wanted all of her kids to be taken care of." I shook my head. "Linda and I agreed to keep our finances separate. This is my money I worked for before I even met your mother. And I've already provided for Sophia and Leo because I know they'll use it wisely. But you've never taken responsibility for anything in your life." James's face darkened. "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising. "You've played favorites this entire time. What makes David and Emma so much better than me?" I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. "You really want me to answer that?" James's calm facade cracked. "So that's it?" he spat. "You're just cutting me out like I'm nothing? I'm not cutting you out. You were never entitled to my money in the first place." His hands clenched into fists. "I swear, if you don't fix this, if you don't treat me like the son you claim I am, I'll make you regret it." I folded my arms. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" He smirked. "Just wait and see." Then he walked out. I thought that would be the last I heard from him. I was so wrong. Over the next month, James turned the entire extended family against me. He told relatives I was disowning Linda's children out of spite, that I was a greedy old man hoarding money, that I had always treated him like an outsider and was now proving it by leaving him with nothing. I started getting phone calls from cousins and aunts, all asking the same thing. "Why are you doing this to James? Don't you love him like your own?" Sophia and Leo, to their credit, stayed out of it, but David and Emma were furious. "You know he's manipulating everyone, right?" Emma snapped over the phone. "James doesn't care about family. He just cares about money." David was more direct. "Dad, do not cave. If you give him a single cent, he'll bleed you dry." I reassured them that nothing would change. But deep down I was worried, because James wasn't done. One evening, I got home late and went to my study to catch up on emails, but something felt off. I checked my desk, my filing cabinet, and that's when I noticed someone had gone through my paperwork. James. The first had security cameras in the house. The next morning, I checked the footage, and sure enough, there he was, breaking into my office, going through my documents. I felt my blood boil. James wasn't just trying to guilt me anymore. He was looking for something, anything he could use against me. And if I didn't act fast, he might just find a way to take what wasn't his. I knew then, this wasn't over. This was just beginning. James breaking into my office was the final straw. It wasn't just desperation anymore. It was a declaration of war. I wasn't about to sit back and wait for his next move. So, I made mine first. The morning after discovering James had been snooping through my office, I called my estate attorney, Mr. Carter. We met that afternoon, and I told him everything, the threats, the manipulation, the break-in. He nodded gravely. James is building a case against you, he said. He's probably looking for loopholes in your estate plan. I already knew that, but hearing it out loud made my stomach turn. What do we do? I asked. Carter didn't hesitate. We lock everything down. That day, we moved all my assets into a secured trust. My properties were placed under a corporate entity. My bank accounts were restructured to ensure no unauthorized access. My will was updated to reflect that James was explicitly excluded from any inheritance. If James wanted a fight, he was going to lose. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, it happened. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying my morning coffee, when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in a suit, holding a stack of legal documents. "You've been served," he said, handing me the papers. I felt my stomach drop. I flipped through the documents, scanning the words. James was suing me. The lawsuit was full of outrageous accusations. James claimed that I had financially manipulated his late mother, Linda. He argued that I had coerced her into signing an unfair prenuptial agreement. He accused me of discriminating against him by excluding him from my will. But the worst part? He was demanding a full 50% share of my estate, $5 million. I wanted to laugh at the sheer insanity of it, but I didn't, because I knew this was serious. If James was willing to go this far, he wasn't going to stop until he destroyed me. News of the lawsuit spread fast, and just like that, the family was split. Emma and David were furious. "This is insane," David said. "He's literally trying to rob you." Emma shook her head. "James is desperate, but this is low even for him." Sophia and Leo, on the other hand, were conflicted. They didn't agree with what James was doing, but they also didn't want to completely cut him off. "I think he just feels like he was never really part of this family," Sophia admitted. I sighed. "That's not an excuse to steal from me." Leo, usually quiet, nodded. "Yeah, but I don't think he's going to back down." He was right. James wasn't backing down. He was just getting started. As the case progressed, James took his attacks to the public. He told relatives that I had manipulated his mother into a bad marriage. He spread rumors that I had hidden money from my late wife. He even hinted that I had connections keeping me out of trouble. It was all lies, but some people believed him. I started getting calls from distant relatives, former business partners, even old friends. "Hey, is everything okay? I heard some things about you." It was humiliating. James wasn't just coming for my money. He was coming for my reputation. One evening, I was in my office, reviewing case documents, when my phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "Emma, Dad, you need to see this. Check your email." I frowned and opened my inbox. There was an email from her, an attachment labeled James Plan Top PDF. I clicked on it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Emma had somehow gotten access to private emails between James and his lawyer, and the documents laid out everything. James had been planning this lawsuit for months. He had been researching ways to contest wills even before Linda passed away. He had sent emails to multiple lawyers, searching for someone willing to destroy me in court. And the worst part, he never actually cared about family fairness. He just wanted the money. The next day, I called my lawyer. "I have proof," I told him. "James is doing this out of greed." Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We're taking this to the judge." The court hearing was set for the following week. James walked into the courtroom looking smug, thinking he had already won. But when my lawyer presented the emails, his face was drained of color. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed it, because this wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was fraud, and James had just sealed his own fate. James thought he had me cornered. He walked into that courtroom with all the arrogance of a man who believed he was about to get rich, but he had no idea what was coming. The judge started by allowing James's lawyer to present his argument. It was predictable. That I had manipulated my late wife into a prenup that was unfair. That I had coerced her into leaving nothing for her children. That my exclusion of James from my will was blatant discrimination against my late wife's family. James sat there with a smug grin, glancing back at our relatives in the gallery as if he had already won. But then my lawyer, Carter, stood up, and that's when everything changed. Carter walked up, completely calm, and placed a thick file in front of the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed further, I'd like to introduce new evidence into the case." The judge skimmed through the documents, then raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Carter, please explain." Carter turned toward James, his expression cold and sharp. "These are emails, Your Honor. Emails between the plaintiff and multiple attorneys he contacted long before my client's wife passed away. In these emails, the plaintiff clearly states his intention to challenge the will, no matter what it said." The judge's eyes flicked over to James. "Mr. James, is this true?" James stammered. I don't know what those emails are, but Carter wasn't finished. Carter continued, his voice steady. "These emails prove that the plaintiff never intended to respect the wishes of his late mother or my client. In fact, there are multiple instances where he refers to his own siblings as obstacles, and my client a son old man who won't be around forever." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. James's smug confidence gone. His lawyer paled, flipping through the documents as if hoping to find a way out. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking unimpressed. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "that Mr. James was planning to contest this will even before his mother passed away?" Carter nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor." The room fell silent. I turned to look at James. He wasn't grinning anymore. The moment the court adjourned for the day, our relatives swarmed me. I could see the look of pure betrayal in their eyes as they stared at James. One of my cousins, who had originally defended him, shook his head in disgust. "You planned this from the start?" he demanded. "You told us it was about fairness. You lied to everyone." James stuttered, trying to save face. "No, it's not like that. But it was exactly like that. And everyone knew it. The people who had once backed James, they walked away. He stood there alone, eyes darting around like a trapped rat. That night, I got a call. James. I stared at my phone, debating whether to answer. Then, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Dad, listen, we can work this out," he said, his voice full of fake sincerity. I almost laughed. "Work this out?" I repeated. "You sued me." James hesitated, then said, "I was angry. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we can fix this. Just put me back in the will, and I'll drop everything." I felt a cold wave of disgust. "You don't get it, do you?" I said. "This isn't just about money. You betrayed this family." James huffed. "So what? You're seriously going to cut me out forever over some stupid lawsuit?" "Yes." The silence stretched. Then James's voice turned cold. "If you don't fix this, I'll make sure you regret it." I didn't even blink. "Try me." Then I hung up. A week later, we returned to court. James sat there, looking pale and exhausted. His lawyer, barely making an effort anymore, because they knew. They had already lost. The judge took his seat and cleared his throat. After reviewing all the evidence, he said, "This case is dismissed with prejudice." That meant James couldn't refile. He had lost, completely. The fallout was instant. James was publicly humiliated. He lost all credibility with the family. He wasted thousands on legal fees and walked away with nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. After the trial, the bank reached out to me. Apparently, James had tried to take out a loan against my assets, claiming he had a rightful stake in my estate. Since he lost the lawsuit, the loan fell through. And now, James was drowning in debt. I didn't feel bad for him. Not even a little. A month later, James tried one last time. He showed up at my house. I didn't let him inside. He stood on my porch, looking thinner, more desperate. "Dad, I have nowhere else to go." I crossed my arms. "That's not my problem." His face twisted in anger. "You did this to me." I shook my head. "No, James, you did this to yourself." And with that, I closed the door in his face. Part 4. Cutting him off for good. James had lost. Completely. But he wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat. And I just knew he wasn't done trying to weasel his way back into my life. I had underestimated him once. I wouldn't make that mistake again. After the judge dismissed his case with prejudice, James's downfall was swift. He had poured thousands of dollars into his legal fees, hoping for a massive payday. Now, he had nothing. And worse, he had burned every bridge he had left. The extended family wanted nothing to do with him. My lawyer had filed a legal warning that if James attempted to challenge my will again, he would be hit with a counter lawsuit for harassment. His creditors were closing in. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt angry. Angry that it had come to this. Angry that James had wasted so much time and energy trying to steal instead of building something for himself. But mostly, angry that he had once been part of my family, and now he was nothing to me. James didn't give up easily. For the first 2 weeks after the court ruling, he tried to play nice. He sent me long-winded texts about how family is more important than money. He even left voicemails pretending to be remorseful. Dad, I messed up. I know that now. But can we just start over? Please? I didn't respond. Not once. So, when that failed, James switched tactics. The messages started changing. First, he tried guilt-tripping me. Do you really want to die knowing you abandoned your own family? Then, he moved on to veiled threats. You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming. Then, the full-on rage. You took everything from me. You'll pay for this, old man. I rolled my eyes and blocked his number. If James thought I was scared of him, he clearly hadn't been paying attention. One night, about a month after the lawsuit ended, I was sitting in my study when I heard something outside. A rustling sound near my garage. I checked my security cameras. James, dressed in dark clothes, trying to break into my house. My blood ran cold. I called the police immediately. They arrived in minutes, catching James red-handed, trying to pry open a window. When the officers confronted him, he started yelling like a madman. This is my house too. I have a right to be here. He didn't. And the police made sure he understood that when they hauled him off in handcuffs, I pressed full charges. No hesitation. Because enough was enough. The break-in was the final straw. James spent 2 nights in jail before being released on bail. But by then, his life had completely unraveled. His debt collectors were closing in. He lost his apartment because he couldn't keep up with rent. His so-called friends abandoned him once they realized he was broke. He had nothing, and no one to blame but himself. A few weeks later, James showed up at my house one last time. He didn't try to sneak in this time. He just stood on my porch, looking defeated. I didn't invite him in. I just stepped outside and crossed my arms. What do you want? I asked coldly. James swallowed. His voice was hoarse. I have nowhere else to go, he admitted. I waited, saying nothing. I get it, he muttered. I was wrong. I was stupid. I should have never done what I did. I raised an eyebrow. And? James hesitated. And I need help. Just for a little while. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Help? I repeated. After everything you did? His face twisted. Come on, Dad. You're really gonna let me end up on the streets? I took a slow, deep breath. Then I said the words I had been holding back for months. You are not my son. James flinched like I had slapped him. Dad, don't say that. You stopped being my son the moment you tried to steal from me, I interrupted. The moment you dragged our family name through the mud. The moment you broke into my house like a goddamn criminal. James's hands curled into fists. I was desperate. The first snapped. You were greedy. That's all you've ever been. His jaw clenched. His eyes burned with hatred. You're gonna regret this, he whispered. No, James, I said. You're the one who's going to regret everything. Then, without another word, I shut the door in his face. And I never saw him again. The day after that final conversation, I changed my locks. I installed a stronger security system. And I met with my lawyer one last time to ensure James could never touch a cent of my estate. Then, I moved on. I spent time with David and Emma, the kids who actually cared about me. I traveled. I lived my life without looking back. James had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. At the end of the day, family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty. And James, he never had any. So he lost me. And I never lost a single night of sleep over it. After shutting the door in James's face, I expected a sense of closure, a feeling of relief that the worst was behind me. And in some ways, it was. But the scars he left behind, they lingered. For the first time in years, my life was peaceful. No more backstabbing. No more court battles. No more threats or manipulation. It felt strange at first. Almost. Too quiet. David and Emma checked in more often, making sure I was okay. Dad, you should take a vacation, Emma suggested one evening. Do something for yourself. David nodded. You've spent months dealing with that mess. You deserve a break. They were right. I needed to reclaim my life. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I booked a trip. I spent 2 weeks in Italy, something I had always dreamed about, but never found the time for. Walking the cobbled streets of Florence, drinking wine on a balcony overlooking the sea. Eating pasta made me wonder what the hell I had been eating back home. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about James. Not once. Not until I got home. A week after returning from my trip, I got a call from Sophia. She sounded hesitant. Hey, have you heard about James? The first sighed, already tired. What now? She hesitated. He's homeless. Silence. Then I let out a breath. And, she sighed, I don't know, Dad. I thought you should know. I appreciated Sophia's concern. She had always been the kindest of Linda's children, but James had made his choice, and I had made mine. I'm not helping him, I said firmly. Sophia didn't argue. She just sighed again. Yeah, I figured. I thought that would be the end of it. But James had one last card to play. A month later, I got an unexpected visitor. Emma opened the door and froze. James. She turned back to me, expression unreadable. Dad, he's here. I stepped forward, standing in the doorway. James looked like hell. Skinny, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, his once smug confidence gone. I should have felt sorry for him, but I didn't. What do you want? I asked. James shuffled his feet. I don't have anywhere else to go. I folded my arms. That's not my problem. His jaw clenched. Come on, Dad. I've changed. I laughed. Actually, I laughed. Changed? I repeated. You haven't changed at all. James exhaled sharply. Look, I get it. I messed up. But I need a fresh start. Just a little help. I tilted my head. Let me ask you something, James. He nodded eagerly. Yeah, anything. I stared at him. If the lawsuit had gone your way, if you had taken everything from me, would you be standing here right now? His mouth opened, closed. He had no answer, because we both knew the truth. If James had won, he would have left me in ruins without a second thought. And now, he expected me to save him. I shook my head. You were never my son, I said, voice steady, and I owe you nothing. His face twisted with rage. Why owe you are a selfish old man, he roared. I didn't even flinch. No, James, I said. I'm just done being used. Then, without another word, I shut the door. That was the last time I ever saw James. I heard through Sophia that he eventually moved to another state, burning every bridge on his way out. I never reached out, neither did he. And honestly, I was fine with that. I spent the next few months rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends. I started working with charities. I focused on David and Emma, the children who actually cared about me. And with each passing day, the weight of James' betrayal, it got lighter. Looking back, I realized something. Family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty, it's about respect. It's about the people who stand by you, not the ones who try to tear you down. James had thought he could manipulate his way into wealth. Instead, he lost everything. And I gained something far more valuable than money, freedom. After shutting the door on James for the last time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. James was gone, for good. And now I could finally focus on what really mattered, my future, my real family, and my legacy. At first, it felt strange. For years, my life had revolved around fighting off James's greed. Now, with that battle over, I had space to breathe, and I decided I wouldn't waste it. I reconnected with old friends. I started traveling more, exploring places I'd only dreamed of visiting. I picked up hobbies I had neglected for years. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. David and Emma stayed by my side through it all, not because they expected anything from me, but because they truly cared. One day, during a family dinner, David cleared his throat and said, Dad, I want to say something. I looked up. I just want to say, I'm proud of you, he continued, for standing your ground, for protecting yourself, and finally, putting yourself first. Emma nodded. Yeah, you deserved better than what James put you through, and I'm glad you didn't let him win. Their words meant more to me than I could ever explain. I reached across the table, squeezing both their hands. I love you both, I said, and I'm proud of you too. That was the moment I knew. I had made the right choice. I had given my loyalty to the children who earned it, not the one who tried to take it by force. With James out of the picture, I made sure my estate plan was ironclad. I sat down with my lawyer and restructured everything. David and Emma would inherit the majority of my wealth. A portion of my assets would be donated to charities I cared about. Scholarships would be set up in my name to help underprivileged students. Sophia and Leo, though not my biological children, would receive financial support for their future. But James, he would get nothing, not a single penny, not because I wanted revenge, but because he had earned his place outside of my life. A year passed, then another. James became nothing more than a distant memory, until one day I got a call from Sophia. She sounded hesitant. Dad, I thought you should know. James got arrested. I sat there in silence. She continued. Apparently he was caught in some kind of scam, fraud, identity theft. It's all over the news. I exhaled slowly. And, she sighed, and he's looking at real prison time. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just confirmation that James had always been his own worst enemy. And now, he was finally paying the price. As the years passed, I never looked back. I spent my days surrounded by the people who mattered. I traveled the world. I watched my grandchildren grow up. I built a legacy that wasn't about money, but about making a difference. One evening, while sitting on my porch watching the sunset, Emma joined me. She handed me a cup of tea and smiled. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked. I took a sip, letting the warm breeze wash over me. "No," I said simply, because the truth was, I had no reason to. James had been a part of my past, but he would never be a part of my future. And that was the greatest victory of all. Looking back, I realized something important. Family isn't about DNA. It's about who stands by you, who supports you, who respects you. James had never done any of those things, so he lost me. And I never lost a single night of sleep over it, because in the end I had something he never would, a life well lived.